One of the questions that I'm very interested in is we tend to really focus on those top students, those students who come in who you know from talking with them the first couple of times that they may be graduate school or professional school bound. And so we tend to highlight those honors students, the students who rise to the top of the class, who you enjoy having interesting conversations about intellectual pursuits with. And I think that's all fine and good. But I'm curious these days, and I think we're sort of starting to come around to this idea, that there's a lot of other students who are in our classes and who come to our institutions who also can and should benefit from undergraduate research experiences, whether that's summer research programs, whether that's special opportunities during the academic year, whether that's a different way of conceiving of, say, capstone experiences in a course or senior seminars. So I've become particularly interested in the demographics of undergraduate research. How do you work with students who are the average student in your class, who you know aren't going to go to graduate school because they tell you they're never going to go to graduate school once they, receive their bachelor's degree. And I think those are important for us to really keep in mind. Is this a practice that reaches across the spectrum of the kinds of students that we're all getting at our colleges and our universities? And the other piece of demographics that I think is an interesting question these days in undergraduate research really is the race, ethnicity, international student demographic. And what is our institutional data showing us about who participates in these experiences, not just cut by GPA, for example, but are we being as inclusive as we possibly can in helping students from all of the groups that come to our campuses engage in these kinds of experiences? And so those are two issues, I think, that are actually sort of rising to the top that I'm particularly interested in as well.
This week, during our mentoring seminar, a number of questions have emerged repeatedly across our different working groups, and they've included things like, how are we going to actually define mentoring? What does it really mean, especially in the undergraduate context? How is mentoring a bit different than advising? And what are the contours between those roles? How's mentoring different than friendship, and how's it distinct from teaching? Those are important questions. So defining the boundaries around mentoring. What are the elements of excellent mentoring? So what are the ingredients in a relationship that are really productive? That is a recurring question we have. Is it better to mentor individually, or might it be really effective to mentor in a different format, like a group or a team model? And then how does mentoring influence things like identity? How does mentoring interface with diversity and various experiences that students bring to the mentoring enterprise? So I think those are the things that are just consistent questions and quandaries, and I really think our teams are working hard on resolving those.
I think one of the top concerns is going to be setting appropriate expectations for what undergraduate research can be. The idea that we approach undergraduates where they are and move them forward through a process is going to be much more important than what I think a lot of other research models look towards, which are outcomes and deliverables and those things that we identify as being part of a research product spectrum. But for undergraduates, as wonderful as those things are, and as much as I really want to see students get to those levels, I think focusing on the process is really where we need to be.
One of the top concerns related to the mentoring of undergraduate research, in my experience, has been the fact that a lot of faculty, when they work with undergraduate students, actually are unsure exactly how to treat them in the context of kind of their work in research more broadly. So they tend to work with undergraduate students much like they would with master's students or doctoral students. So there is an expectation of kind of knowledge and autonomy amongst the students that may or may not be there.
A challenge with mentoring undergraduate research is really, I would say, a set of challenges, and that is that we've done a really magnificent job as the professorate of moving this high-impact practice from its traditional locations, really science labs, which are awesome examples of where really engaged undergraduate research occurs and has been for decades. And that we've seen and learned from that model and expanded into every discipline in the academy in many places, in most institutions, at least to some degree. We're still working out how that looks in different disciplines. Just as we, as colleagues of one another, need to learn about each other's research methodologies and epistemologies as we support each other through our careers. So if I'm serving on a personnel committee that's evaluating tenure portfolios, I need to understand what do they do in the performing arts that quote unquote counts as scholarship. And the same thing goes for undergraduates who are those apprentice scholars in the field. So we need to do more work on the learning from scholars in those fields and letting them know that whatever is appropriate in that field is what ought to be encouraged for their undergraduates. Not that they need to fit some existing model because that's been successful or that's been the picture of undergraduate research for a long time.
One of the things that I think is a really interesting issue at the moment in terms of mentoring undergraduate research is kind of whose research is it, and where does that what does that mean, and who benefits from it. I know that both staff and students will benefit. But in terms of, does this get published? Does this see the light of day? Do we disseminate all the research that's engaged in? And particularly in the UK, we don't have that many vehicles for disseminating undergraduate research. There are ways that we can do that through institutional showcases, but to develop a genuine readership, for example, for undergraduate research articles is actually quite challenging. And there are many institutions that are happy to place student research in repositories and in journals, but that don't have a genuine readership, and therefore to start a dialogue with the student authors about what they've done and maybe continue that beyond their undergraduate research experience. And I've done a bit of research in the area of dissemination and found that what really inspires students when they're starting to publish their research is that they want a continuing dialogue. And conferences are a great way of starting that, but they're not a great way of leaving a legacy of something like a journal article behind. When students write a journal article, what they don't get is the dialogue. And I think there's got to be some kind of silver bullet that will allow us to achieve both things, where students gain a legacy, but also that sparks something that creates an ongoing dialogue and building a community of undergraduate researchers that isn't just hosted at a one-time event where you had to be there, I think is a really exciting prospect for us to think about solutions to that. And actually not just for us as faculty to think of that, but it's for students to think how they might evolve that.